Hey guys, this is Eric Vento. This is another podcast of Government to Private, where we talk about the transition from government to private. That could be military, law enforcement, intelligence community, or everything in between, up to and including teachers. Today, we're with my good friend, Joel Rodriguez. Joel and I used to work for the Houston Police Department until we both got out. And so this is a really cool podcast because he's the first person from my former agency that I've had the privilege of having on the podcast. And super excited to have him. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, man. I appreciate the opportunity. Good to see you. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited too, man. So let's jump right in, brother. Tell me about your history and your career at HPD, and then we can jump into everything else.
Sure. Yeah. So I joined the Department of Class 175, back in 1999, and about my first 3 years or so, right when I was about eligible, I was able to transfer into the robbery division. I was a founding member of the Latino squad, in the robbery division. I did 2 years there, and unfortunately, that was when we just elected a new mayor, and that mayor at the time backfilled a lot of the patrol positions from investigations. So I was involuntarily transferred back to patrol from robbery division because I had the lowest seniority. Even though I had one of the highest clearance rates, I still had to go back, and that was okay because in my first 2 months back in patrol, I think I chased down like 7 hijackers or something like that, and got to educate some folks there in patrol about robbery investigations. But I made the best of that. Went back to patrol for a year, did my year in patrol, and then I applied for the vice division, and I was accepted to the vice division. I did undercover operations, and investigations for 2 years there, and that wasn't. It was a good job, right? Because it's the closest thing to acting that I would get, in Hollywood style. But at the end of the day, a majority of what that stuff was misdemeanor crimes, and I was told that you can't get off into the big long-term investigations yet because you need to cut your teeth a little bit more. And I just wasn't used to that after coming from robbery division and making good felony cases on folks. I just decided to move on. So I applied for the homicide division, and I made it to the homicide division. I was in the homicide division for just under 3 years, I think. And then I took the sergeant promotional exam. I promoted to sergeant in 2010, March of 2010. And I was not able to stay in the homicide division. So, I did my mandatory patrol time, went to an investigative unit called Investigative First Responder. If you remember, they were a hybrid.
IFR, right? Baby.
Yeah, IFR. That's right. A high investigative / patrol hybrid. So I was able to train, a number of younger officers, right, in the patrol capacity, but they were also looking to move over to investigations at some point. So very similar to what you're doing now, right? Folks making the transition from government to corporate. Right, I was able to help young officers do that. From there, I went to internal affairs. I got hit with my mandatory, rotation assignment in internal affairs, and I think I did just under 3 years there also. And I applied for the air support division. So I went to I was well received in the air support division, where I stayed for 7 years. That was my longest division, longest tenured division in the department, as both as a TFO and a pilot. Went to pilot training. I was a pilot for 2 years, and that's 2.5 years on night shift, and that's what's gonna lead me to here, right? To making the transition really from government to corporate. And some people might say, man, that's like the best job, in the world. You get to fly police helicopters and chase crooks and all that, and you're right. It is a great job. It's very rewarding and very exhilarating to strap into that $3 million machine and fly across the city at night doing 120 knots in pursuit of a crook or whatever. But I think you and a lot of our listeners will relate that there are times where family comes first. And really, family, in my mind anyway, should always be first. And I say that because I waited so long to have one, and I was in some very hairy, as you were, I'm sure, situations at work that it was time to put them ahead of me. And so there were some family obligations that made me, or I should say, pushed me to leave the air support division because I was on night shift with middle of the week days off for over 2 years. And that just was not, that could not be sustained with my family life anymore. So I transferred out and I became the administrative sergeant for the vehicular crimes division. And I did that probably, I think I left air support in April of 2021. And I went to vehicular crimes division. Good job. People over there are great. But I knew with the career that I had had, being an administrative guy and just managing overtime programs and the budget and vehicle coordinating officers and stuff like that, case management, excuse me, was just not my forte. That's just not how I pictured ending my career. And so I had a moment of clarity one night, and I make it a point to bring up moments of clarity because really, I think, you know, in a man's life, we may only have 2 or 3, right? One of them is maybe when you decide to join the military or join the police department. Another may be when you get married, right? When you ask your love to marry you, or you have a child. So that moment of clarity came to me one night, and my father had passed away in 2015, and he was my biggest supporter, right? He told me often that, you know, hey, there's nothing that you can't do. You just have to figure out how you're going to do it and put your plan in motion. So I could hear him, you know, through my formal education, you know, my undergrad, my master's degree. Those were all things that I did once I became an officer, right? I got both of those degrees while I was on the department. And so I could hear him telling me, you know, what did you put yourself through all of that for? All of those nights that, you know, that you studied, the promotional exam, every other weekend for your executive master's program. You know, if you did all of that only to do nothing with it, to, you know, hang a piece of paper on the wall, you know, it was for naught. So I could hear him saying, hey man, what are you going to do? And that's when I had my moment of clarity that, you know, I applied for a couple other jobs around the department. And to some degree, I think my time in air support hurt me because that was 7 years that I was removed from an investigative division. And so I did not, I interviewed well, but at the end of the day, they chose someone who was already in investigations and had been for, you know, for a while. Completely understandable. I had no hard feelings, but it was at that point, you know, and that night that I just decided, hey, I've had a great career here. I've done everything that I wanted to do. And it's just time for me to go. My time is up. I was at the 23-year mark, and I have all my faculties, all my fingers and toes. You know, we've been through a catastrophic event in air support back in 2020. So it was time for me to go. So really the transition, you know, for family purposes from air support into an admin job was the catalyst for me, basically my nudge, if you will, that, hey, it's time to hang this up and look elsewhere. Execute your plan at this point now.
You know, usually when people get done with this first section, I have like a couple of questions and stuff like that, but you have done such a great job of outlining it that I have 0 questions. So, you know, why don't we just jump right into, like, you know, once you had that nudge, if you will, of, hey, I'm ready to hang up the gun and the badge and move on to whatever's next. How did you approach that process of trying to figure that out?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you. So I will say, and this comes down to one of my talking points and a piece of advice that I have for our listeners and viewers, is that I did not know how long I wanted to be a policeman, right? So initially, I'll tell you this. Initially, when I was in high school or just before high school, I tested for a magnet school for aviation, right? I wanted to be an airline pilot. And the problem with that, though, is that high school was miles and miles away from my home. And I would have had to been on the bus by like 6 a.m. or something ridiculous. I wanted to play baseball, and football with my neighborhood friends, et cetera. So I put that aside. I said, you know what, I'm going to be the police. And I went to be, came to be the police, got my little 60 hours, whatever, became an officer. But probably around that 10-year mark, right before I promoted. And I thought to myself, how long by this time I'm in my early 30s, how long do I actually want to be a policeman? I started because at 10 years, I'm not sure where our viewers come from. I know the military is 20 in, 20 out, right? Some police departments now have done away with 20 in, 20 out. They're up to like 25 now. Some are even, I think, what's LAPD 25 before you can drop, something like that.
Right.
So I was halfway home and I started to think, I should probably look at doing something or investing myself into learning other things that will help me later. And I had a friend, I still do have a friend, who suggested this master's program to me. And he said, hey man, he said, I'm looking at this new program, University of Houston downtown started, you should consider it. I think it'd be a good fit for what you've already, for the knowledge, that you've already attained and the career you've already had, even at 10 years. So I looked into it, and that's when my wheels really started turning. I said, he brings up a good point. I can take my law enforcement experience in investigations, whether it be reactive or proactive, surreptitious, it's survey, all of that stuff, and combine that with a formal education. And so when I hit my 20 years, at least I have, or 20 years, or I should say, an injury, or something takes me or forces me out of the police world, right? I would have something else to do. And so that's what really got me thinking about making a plan for myself. And that brings me to my first talking point is, when possible, right? Whether it is 5 years in to your military service or your law enforcement service, or 10 years, right? Is make a timeline for yourself. Say, okay, I'm at my 5-year mark. I want to be out of here by 10 years. 10 years, at least I should be somewhat vested. I'll get somewhat of a pension or a retirement benefit. 10 is all I really want to do. And so start setting yourself up for wins as soon as possible. So things like, what am I lacking in my education? Do I need to finish my undergrad? Would I like to get a master's degree of some sort, whether it was, master's of business administration or security management or something to that effect, but have a plan, because you never know when you may have a family issue that takes you out of the police game, right? You don't know if you're going to have a health issue or some type of injury that's going to take you out of the police game, or you just don't know if politics are going to enter the chat, for what it's worth.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden you have a new chief or a new mayor or new county commissioner, judge, whatever it is, that you just throw your hands up at, and it's time to move on. But have a plan, right? Have something else to fall back on. So that's what really prodded my.
That's just not something that a lot of people think about until
You're right.
Stuff hits the fan.
That's right.
And I know, speaking from my own experience with HPD, I thought I was invincible.
Yeah.
Like I thought, man, there's no way that they're going to look past all this good work that I'm doing and, put me out to pasture.
Sure.
And, when you have that arrogant mindset, let's call it what it is, you get told all the time in the academy and in service, like, hey, remember, you're not important. The city's always going to look out for number one.
Yep.
And, you're like, oh, that's just you. That's not me. And, I was arrogant enough to think that, I was the exception.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a backup plan in place when I was, fired basically from the Houston Police Department. And, once you leave the PD under less than honorable circumstances, doesn't matter whether it's the fourth largest agency in the country or it's a small town PD, you tend to get blackballed wherever you go. And so I was still under the impression, at least, that I wanted to be back in law enforcement. And so even though I was given other chances at other agencies, it was still like walking on eggshells,
Mhm.
because, once you get that reputation, whether it's warranted or not, you still, it's always like trust but verify,
Right.
and they're just waiting for you to screw up in any kind of way, shape, or form just to shuttle that or shunt that liability off of you.
Sure.
And so, I love the talking point that you have about having a plan, because, it's like that really popular quote about, like, no one never has a plan until you get hit in the mouth,
Yeah.
and I got hit in the mouth 3 times in a row, and I still didn't have a plan. It
Right.
took me that, that much of going through the meat grinder
Right.
before I realized, okay, it's time to give this up.
Mhm.
It's time to move on. It's time to take care of my family. They've been through enough. I've pursued my dream about as
Yep.
far as I want to take it. And it's just not in the cards anymore. And, you know, I could not agree with you more. And I think that, unfortunately, we can say this until we're blue in the face, but for most people, it takes them experiencing something deeply personal to them
Yes.
for them to actually say in their mind, you know what, that makes sense, and I need to implement something similar to that.
Yeah. So for me, I'm a big believer, and I always have been, in knowing when enough is enough. But you or I can't make that determination for somebody else.
Right.
Right. And so I ask folks, hey, meditate on it for a little bit, right? Reflect within yourself. If all the signs are there, then, enough is enough. But you need to know when that is, because the point is different for everyone, right? And if, to your point, what you just said, you went to two other agencies, right? Because you couldn't let go yet. You weren't ready, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be ready. And I would advise anyone that's listening or watching to know when you are, and do your best to stay until you are ready, if that makes sense, right? Don't leave prematurely. Don't bite off your nose, to spite your face, kind of deals. Someone told me a long time ago, don't make any quick decisions, if possible, right? I mean, everybody's circumstance is different, but if you don't have to leave right away or jump ship right away, then don't, because you're only going to regret it later on. When you get into the corporate world, it could be a year or two later, and you may say, hey, you know what, and I can say this out of experience, because someone who's on our physical security team just went through that. And he's a former Marine. He is a police officer, and he is still relatively young, probably one of the youngest members of our team. And that's exactly what happened. He just realized that, this is not what I want right now. I still have a lot of running and jumping to do. I want to go get that out of the way first. And then maybe, I'll revisit this. But know, one, when you're ready, and two, be sure you're ready to move on, right? And make a conscious decision to do it, so that you don't waste anybody else's time. That after all the vetting and the getting you in and getting you acclimated, only for you to later say, nah, I'm gonna go back to the cop world. So that's just my little take.
I agree. I mean, I probably talk to at least 15 to 20 people every single week on, should I transition now? What should I be doing? How can I set myself up for success, et cetera? And obviously those are super subjective questions based upon everyone's personal experiences. But if they have a current job, I'm always like, look, unless that job is just the most toxic thing in the world, stay at that job.
That's right.
As long as you can, because it is so much easier to find a job while you have a job.
That's right.
And a lot of times it takes several months or more to go through the interviews and get a job. And it's so much more healthy to have that income coming in and that sense of stability, because, where the rubber really meets the road is where you're like, man, I just want to get out of here, and you resign. And then you think in your head, man, I have all this amazing experience. It's going to be easy for me to find a job.
Mhm.
And for the large majority of people, it is not easy.
That's
You
right.
know, it takes a lot of work and a lot of connections and a lot of just hitting the pavement every day. And, you know, that's where I think just so many people go astray
Yeah.
is, you know, they know that they have value, which they do,
Yep.
but they're not sure how that translates in the corporate world.
Right.
And so they're convinced that it's just a one-to-one transfer,
No,
you know, and it's like
no,
learning a different language,
it is.
you know.
Absolutely. And to your point, you bring up another great point, again, about the plan, right? And you can make the plan a win for everybody. And I say that because when you're constructing your plan, right? For me, for example, it's what do I like to do? Well, aside from flying, right? I really love investigations. I did 3 years in homicide, and robbery was great. Robbery taught me all about the code of criminal procedure, the court process, all things of that nature. But robbery really, really gave me an education like that's unparalleled, right? When it comes to just talking to people, surveillance. I hate to use the term, but the thrill of the hunt, so to speak. The who done it.
Yes.
Putting the puzzle together. So that's really what I like to do, right? And so when I talk about the plan, what do you like to do? What are you good at? What experiences or formal training, right, or formal education have you had? And so these are some of the things that help with the transition. Not only that help with the transition, they set you apart. They set us apart from any other guy that has 10 or 20 years law enforcement experience and 4 years prior military experience. There's a number of policemen out there, but when it comes down to 3 different resumes that I'm looking at, which one of these looks different than the other in a good way or a bad way, right?
Right.
And so that was also part of my plan. Is that when it came to people like, man, you've been around all over the department. What division haven't you been in? And but for me, that was by design, and I did that because I loved investigations, but I did not want to pigeonhole myself just to one type. I wanted to investigate all kinds of things so that I would be more rounded, right, and more marketable later. And so again, when I talk about wins, it's a win-win. It's a win for me because I get all kinds of experiences. I get to partake in all types of investigations, right? But then later on, it's a win for you, Eric, the hiring manager, because you look at my resume or things that I've done and it's like, well, yeah, not only did he do 23 years in one spot, he did 23 years in multiple spots in the same department, right? So now it looks a little more I look a little more marketable compared to someone else that just stayed in one spot for X amount of years. So that's something that I really want to emphasize to our listeners and our viewers that when you're thinking about your plan, right, think about what your strengths are, but also know your weaknesses, because that is definitely something that will come up in an interview in corporate America. They will ask you what your weaknesses are, or in my case, my executive director, and I can get into. I don't even think we've talked about where I transitioned to yet, right? Where I worked, but
totally up to you, man.
But I'll say it in a minute. But in that case, he said, "Hey, this all looks great, but tell me about a time you failed." And so, as comfortable as it may be, like you said, to your point, at some point we all have to acknowledge, that we're not the Billy Bad Butt, that we thought we were, because now you're sitting at a whole different side on a whole other side of the desk, right? Now you're not the interviewer, you're the interviewee. So you're in the hot seat. And that's part of the planning, though, right? Things that can help you win, set yourself apart.
And I think about this question all the time because, so many of us who are coming out of law enforcement or any other aspect of the government, we usually interview pretty well, especially people who have jumped around. We know how to interview. We know what the process is like. And, it's the interview that we go into for like lateraling to a different division within HPD is, in my opinion, having gone through both now, far less stressful than going to a corporate interview, because you're so comfortable, and I tell people now that, not only do you have to be prepared to talk about yourself in a different light,
Right.
but you have to be prepared to articulate why your law enforcement experience translates to the corporate world.
Right.
And then answer behavioral based questions like you were talking about. Like, I always talk about this. I was working with an ATF stack, about 6 months ago, and he kept on saying, like, man, I keep getting to the middle stage, but I never make it to the end. What am I doing wrong? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but it's probably you're interviewing if you keep getting consistently at that point. So I
Right.
put him through a mock interview, and I asked him a very commonly asked question, which was, tell me about a time that you experienced conflict in the workplace.
Yes.
Like, how did you handle it? How did you approach it? And then what was the end result?
Yes.
And, for our listeners out there, what the corporate world is expecting you to say is a short 2 to 3 minute blurb that a 15-year-old could understand. Yep. They just want to see how you think, how you process out loud, and whether you can exist and use your interpersonal relationship to really thrive in a diverse culture.
Right.
That's basically how they want you to respond. Well, this guy, and I kid you not, jumped into a 20-minute diatribe about a contentious relationship he had with a former CI. And at the end of that 20-minute conversation, I was like, well, I got some good news and I got some bad news. Good news is I have figured out why you're not making it to the final stage. The bad news is, I explained it to him. And as soon as I explained to him that, most of your audience doesn't know about their unique relationship that a handler has with their CI,
right,
nor can they really correlate that to the private sector.
Yep.
It was like the light bulb just went boom.
Yep.
And he was just like, well, dang it.
Yes.
And I'm like, exactly. I was like,
yes.
So it's not that you're not qualified. It's not that you're, not the person that they're looking for. You're just not telling your experience in a way that they can understand.
That's right.
That's right. Or that they can relate to.
That's right.
And I was like, you have to know your audience.
Exactly.
And, I was like, that's fine if you're, going up to the SCS level or something like that, where everyone who's around that table knows exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
But for most people in the corporate world, they do not have the backgrounds that we do. And you're going to alienate them because they can't understand you.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And to your point, another part of the plan, right, for say my police people, if they work any extra details, extra jobs, like we call them in the police department, right? Find some extra jobs that might put you in the corporate environment. Don't just pick the road jobs where you're going to sit in your car with your flashing lights on for X amount of dollar an hour because it's easy, right? Find a job that is going to put you in a corporate environment.
Yes.
So that you can learn some of the business acumen and some of the terminology, right? And learn the comings and goings or some of the ins and outs of the corporate workplace. And so there were two places in particular that I worked over the years. And one was a hospital, was a big hospital group here in Houston in the medical center, right? And I worked there for a number of years. I worked there from like 2006 or 7 all the way until probably 2015 or 16. And the other was, without naming it, is a large restaurant group here located in the in the Houston area, and obviously they have business units all over the country, right? Primarily at tourist attractions and on the coasts. But I worked there for the same amount of time from 2005, I think, until probably almost like 2020. Actually, no, I'm at the time I almost retired, so 2022. But again, I say all of that because I was in an office-like environment, right, providing security for them, and I did some executive detail work with the man, including at his residence, at his home, for a number of years. So when you put yourself in positions like that, you're already making a transition. You just don't even know it. You're not really you're just not really acknowledging it. But I approach everything with eyes open, ears open, mouth closed, right? Listen to everything and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask some of these folks in these places that you're working, because they'll tell you. It's a benefit to them for you to know what it is that you're in and around also. So again, part of the planning process.
Amen. And, I definitely know who you're talking about, because I believe I've lost money on several occasions at one of his many casinos, but
as have I.
But you're so right in that, from the extra job mentality, off duty work, whatever you want to call it, if you can find those corporate jobs that allow you to do both.
Yes.
To serve as private security or whatever you want to call it, while also maintaining your law enforcement credentials, can really give you like this really introspective look into, could I be happy doing this if I didn't have my gun and my badge anymore?
Right.
But it also helps you build those relationships.
Absolutely.
Because, man, like I tell people all the time, when you build a relationship, you're not building a relationship with one person. Mm-hmm. You're building a relationship with everyone that person knows too.
That's right.
And so it's just like the Venn diagram that keeps expanding outward. Mm-hmm. And, from the the restaurant group's perspective, like I know most of the security people over there still, and if they ever left law enforcement, they could easily transition into a corporate security role there full time, because mm-hmm. they've already built that rapport.
Yes.
They've already built that relationship. And even if they choose not to go that route, they're still going to have a good letter of recommendation and some good corporate experience on their resume already, without ever having left the police department.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's beneficial for everybody to actually, put yourself in that type of environment. It's only going to be a benefit to you, both financially and through some type of education, right? Even if it's informal, just the experience in itself.
So what has been some of the things that have surprised you the most about working in your current role, or just working in the corporate world in general?
I would say the amount of communication, right? And in this day and age of emails, and so I think to some degree, a lot of the personal aspect gets lost. We can say, I'm sure you can remember from cop life, right? Going in and cutting up the day's events over your first cup of coffee, right? Or what happened yesterday. If you didn't debrief yesterday, maybe everybody was tired as heck and just ready to bail out of there, right? And you slept on it, or somebody slept on it, and you talked about whatever happened yesterday. For the most part, I think in corporate world, a lot of that stuff happens fast. And they're really pretty good at communication, because we're at our desks, more often than not, doing whatever it is that we do, throughout the day, and the emails come in and you take a glance and, well, I better reply to that one real quick. So the response, I guess, or the amount of correspondence that comes through, all day long, I think is a big change from what I'm used to. I think there's a way that I want to phrase this, and I don't want it to sound as if, law enforcement folks or government folks or our military folks are not professional, because that's furthest from the truth, right? We're all professionals. But I think there's a difference in the type of professional, right? Or a different level of professionalism, I think, so to speak. And so the big surprise to me was how quickly I was accepted, right? Or how proud they seemed of me coming into the corporate environment, right? And I say that because you remember from cop life, right? You could transfer in a new division and it may take a few weeks, right? Or a few months before you could establish those relationships with folks in there, because although we're professionals and we do a job, right, professionally, or we should anyway, to the best we can, there are sometimes can be some folks that don't necessarily act the most professional, right, in and around the workplace. So I think coming into the corporate environment and being so well received, and the reception that they had, as if they were proud, they were proud of their selection, right? They were proud to have me, happy to have me, was a big difference. Was very different for me, coming from some of the other experiences we've had, in and around the department. So that was a big one. I know on your website you have on there, a sense of empowerment, and it's, I'm not at all, looking for power really, or empowerment, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm just J-Rod. I'm still Joel. I'm still J-Rod. I'm always going to do my job the best I can. But it was nice to be so well received, right, and so well respected, from what they saw on my resume, but then also with my first interactions with them. And being humble, I think, humbling yourself, just what you said just a while ago about it's okay not to know it all, right? But you have to admit that you don't know it all, and nobody expects you to, right? We're all human. People didn't. It's funny because in air support, one of the things I would get from a lot of the senior pilots, right, the master pilots, is they would always pick on the newer pilots, right, or the less tenured pilots. And one of the things that I would always get them with is, last time I checked, you weren't born with wings. So, everybody gains experiences, right, as they come along. But I would say I was not immediate. I wasn't pressured. I was not pressured to immediately know it all. When I came into the corporate world. So they were willing to show me what needed to be shown, explain to me what needed to be explained, right? I had a 2-week long orientation. It was very, very detailed, very in depth, where, often in the police world, you may transfer into a new division and they may give you a handbook similar to the field training handbook and tell you, hey, you're on your own. If you have any questions about your cases or where they go, that's right. Come see me, kind of deal. So just the level of professionalism I was shown just walking into the door was probably the biggest thing for me. Yeah,
I love that,
and it was a plus. Obviously, it was a plus. I'll tell you now, and for those listening and watching, it's
like you have 20 years or however many years of really fantastic experience. You just need to learn how to articulate that.
That's right.
And once you do, no one is saying that you need to start over at the bottom, because you've already earned it, and it's really nice to hear that, Next Era Energy and other companies like we've heard previously don't have unrealistic expectations of the people who are coming in from the government. They recognize that, hey, you have skills. That's why you were hired. You have the interpersonal relationships and the soft skills to function within the corporate environment, which were identified partially through the interview process. But they also recognize that, of course, there's going to be a transition period as you ramp up into a different culture in a different world.
Absolutely.
And so it's just really nice to hear that companies, have realistic expectations for people, because you definitely hear, I think, more along the lines of the companies who get called out in a negative way for having unrealistic expectations. So I love that. I love, the 2-week period that you have. And, it just sounds like it's a really, really healthy place to work.
It is. It's a great company. Again, I told someone yesterday, matter of fact, that I ran into the police department. I have no regrets. Could not be happier. right? Could not be more happy. It's a great place. We're a Fortune 200 company, and they are very much in tune with their employees, right? And the pulse of the company. And, it's real easy for government entities, police departments, other companies to say, people are our biggest resource, right? Until, like you put it, till the rubber hits the road. You can easily, they can show you how expendable you really are. And conversely, when you come to work for a big company that invests in you and wants to invest in you and continue to invest in you because you are truly one of their greatest assets, right?
Yes,
that's very,
absolutely.
very refreshing. Yeah, it was very refreshing to come in there and be welcomed the way I was.
Well, I love that, Brett. I love to hear it. So, this has been a fantastic session so far, easily one of my favorite. And as we wrap up for the evening, is there any advice or any pearls of wisdom, if you will, that you want to leave our listeners?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So I think the last thing I will leave folks with is just coming from the military, coming from law enforcement, wherever it was that you were before. It's hard sometimes to shake that persona, right? Whether you're, an officer in the military, whether, you're a supervisor of some sort in law enforcement, just do the best that you can to humble yourself. Be humble, because that will come through very quickly in an interview. Should you, of course, you're going to have a telephone interview first, right? And you may make it through the telephone interview, but when you get to the in-person interview, that is where they really are going to feel you out, right? Because now they can see you. And these two, when we're talking about these security jobs, right, or corporate security jobs, hey, they too have also been in government jobs or in prior military jobs, right? And they're very much in tune with others, just like cops are, just like the police are, right? So they will pick up very quickly on things that you say, things that you're doing, your mannerisms, how you respond to questions, things of that nature. So I think, like the hiring manager told me, they interviewed, of all the applicants, they interviewed 3 and in person. And your resume is your resume, right? But it's how you, like you said, articulate the things that are on your resume, how you respond to their questions, both verbally and non-verbally, that are going to carry you through. And when I say be humble, I mean, cops have a reputation, right? Almost a stigma, if you will, of being switched on all the time. And that's okay. You can still be switched on, but be switched on with your ears, right? And your eyes, and not so much your mouth. So don't leave the Billy butt, the Billy bad butt at the door, and just humble yourself and have a conversation with the folks. I approach interviews, job interviews. It's just a conversation. Really is what it is. It's just a conversation that they're having with you to learn more about you. So that's my parting piece of advice, right? Is just humble yourself and just be yourself, because I think folks can tell when, nerves, we can catch nerves. We know when somebody's nervous, but we can also tell when we think somebody's not being forthcoming, or they're trying to be a little more standoffish maybe than they should be, or they're coming across as standoffish. So just be humble, be personable, and be genuine, right? And if you don't understand the nature of their question as they're answering it, it's just like being on the stand. I'm sorry, counselor, can you rephrase that question? The same in the interview. I'm sorry, I'm not really following the way you have that phrased. Can you phrase it maybe a little bit differently? I'm not familiar with that terminology or that vernacular,
Yeah,
or something
absolutely.
to that effect, Because then then it shows that you're engaged. You're listening to what they're asking.
Exactly.
You're just not really comprehending it, and you want to make sure that you do, because obviously this is a job that you're talking about. You're trying to get.
Absolutely. You know, I think I think your switched on the ears thing. I think I'm going to remember that for a long time. But I'm also probably going to have that put on a T-shirt, because like, you know, like that. I mean, obviously I find it really funny, but I find it funny because God, I need to take that advice sometimes, you know, and I just wish that I had heard that sometime when I was in law enforcement. I mean, obviously no guarantee that I would have listened,
Yeah.
you know, but like, I've just never heard it described in that way before.
Yeah.
And it just really resonated with me, you know, and I'm definitely like, when I get done with this and I go outside, I'm going to talk to my wife. I'm going to say, hey, I need to remember this quote. Okay.
I'm gonna work on switching on my ears and listen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
it's just really good, and I really appreciate it. But you know, Joel, I really appreciate you being here, man. This has been a really fantastic podcast, and I really think that not only did I get something really valuable from it, but I think whoever listens to this is going to really identify with a lot of what you've said, and hopefully, you know, the advice that you've given and the story that you shared will really resonate with a lot of people and cause them to think about things just a little bit differently.
Oh,
And
thank you. Yeah.
you know, ultimately that's all we can hope for.
That's it,
You know?
right? It's just training, right? It's just, we've all been trained to a certain extent, right? Now it's just kind of fine tuning the training a little bit, right? That we already have. Like you said, there's so many things that we already have and that we know. It's just getting folks to say it or say it differently, right?
Exactly.
And to translate it over to the corporate sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Joel, thanks for being with us again. You know, listeners, if you have any questions, please feel free to private message us on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with both of us on LinkedIn. You know, we really want to ensure that if you do have any questions or that you have additional things to follow up on, we're here for you. You know, this transition process is not easy, but it is doable.
Yep.
And there are plenty of people who have gone before you and have transitioned successfully, and we are here to help you. You know, we have been where you are for the most part, and we can identify what the struggle that the transition is. So if you have questions, if you need help, please reach out, and we'll see you next time.
Eric,
Thanks,
one more thing. Sorry, one more thing.
Go ahead.
One more thing. If our listeners and viewers are not comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, right? I know plenty of people that can arrive on a homicide or any scene for that matter and orchestrate it just like a conductor. You do this, I need you to do this, etc. But when the camera light turns on and they stick a microphone in front of their face, they lose it. They freeze, right? So again, with the plan and gaining certificates or some type of certifications training, if you are not comfortable presenting a PowerPoint or giving a presentation of some sort, because you will, whether it's to your director or maybe you have this really big case that you're working on that the board of directors actually wants to see, or the vice president of this or that. Yeah, acclimate yourself to speaking publicly, even if it's in front of the mirror or to your dog. But get yourself used to talking to people.
Amen. And you know, for the people out there who are like, hey, that's me. You know, Toastmasters is a great organization for practicing public speaking and getting more comfortable with delivering things, you know, in an audible way. And there's a lot of resources out there. All you have to do is look for it, seek it out, and commit to it.
Yeah, even a speech class at a JUCO, junior college, community college, whatever, you know, take a 3-hour class on speech and it'll put you a little further ahead of the game than you already were. It will not hurt
Absolutely.
you. Yep. Thank you,
Awesome.
Eric. I really appreciate our visit, man. Feel free to reach out anytime. And like you told them, they have my, you can relay my LinkedIn and shoot me a message, shoot you a message, whatever. I'm here to help, man. I've been blessed and I'm here to pay it forward.
I love it, man. Words to live by. Well, Joel, thanks again, man. You have a great day and we'll chat soon. Okay.
All right, brother. Be safe.
All right, man. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.